and we changed our detour. It's going to
starting
make it a
po
bit more
ng
interesting.
city
This is
tour.
St Andrew Square, which was the financial centre for Edinburgh and Scotland for a couple of hundred years. And on your left-hand side there, that's the most significant building in Edinburgh, I think. The Royal Bank of Scotland World Headquarters, set back from the road there. It opened as a family home in the 1770s for the Dundas family, Lawrence Dundas. There meant to be a church on that site, but Lawrence Dundas, he bought the ground and built a house. Eventually it ended up with the Royal Bank of Scotland in the 1820s, and it's still the World Headquarters, and it's still a branch. Go in and have a look. It's wonderful inside. Won't be open today, unfortunately. And it's no longer about high finance square, it's now all about high-end shopping and eating and drinking, including on your left-hand side there. Well, just over a year ago, November 2021, Gordon Ramsay opened his restaurant there. How did we cope in Edinburgh before we had a Gordon Ramsay restaurant? Offering you the chance to buy beef Wellington for £50 each. Sort of his signature dish, isn't it? Somebody once described beef Wellington to me as, well, it's a bit like stew in a cake, which is a fantastic description. Gordon Ramsay is just about to open another restaurant in Edinburgh. It's going to be in the brand new shopping centre, the St James Quarter, and he's going to call it Street Burger. It's going to sell hamburgers. He should really have called it the Ramsay McDonald's. And straight away we can see why this diversion isn't going to work. We'll be turning to our right hand side and then to our left and into George Street. We're on the first Edinburgh New Town. We talk about Edinburgh New Town. We should talk about Edinburgh New Towns. There were 6 built over a period of about 100 years, plus all their extensions. This first new town was just 3 streets: Princes Street to the south, Queen Street to the north, and in the middle, here, the magnificent George Street. George Street, beautiful street, 110 feet wide, just for show. And that church on the right-hand side, well, that was the intended church for St Andrew Square. On your left, the best dressed building in Edinburgh every Christmas, the Dome. It's magnificent.
Guys,
Go and
just
have a
keep
look.
watching, okay?
It's just as good inside.
We joined
and they usually have a snow machine up there as well,
sightseeing tours.
so that at least in one part of
meron yan po
Edinburgh,
nagsasalita.
there's always snow at Christmas. George
We
Street
joined the group tour.
is now the main
So
shopping
open
street
deck.
in Edinburgh, taken over from
We
Princes
pay,
Street.
$19.
In the last 2 years, Princes Street, last 2
It's
years
worth it,
alone,
huh?
Princes Street has lost 25%
yeah, 19
of
pounds.
its retail
Correction,
stores, and
19
it's
pounds.
now American sweet shops.
It's worth
we
it
really
dahil
need.
makikita na po
And things
namin
like that,
ang
and Princes Street.
downtown
So
Edinburgh
George Street
dito po
has
sa
become,
Scotland.
well, this was the original high-end shopping street in Edinburgh. It's a lovely street to have a walk along. There are many, many original buildings from 1767 to 1830, and the building
Makinig
of the
na
first
lamang
new
po
town
kayo.
in George Street.
George Street.
George Street connects the 2 garden squares. At the east end, St Andrew Square, where we were, patron saint of Scotland, and at the west end, Charlotte Square, where we'll be towards the end of what will be in a few minutes.
We are
We'll
in
be
the
in Charlotte
George
Square.
Street.
Charlotte Square was originally going to be called St George Square, patron saint of England, patron saint of Scotland at the east end, patron saint of England at the west end. George III, king at the time, he didn't like that. He said he wanted it to be called Charlotte Square in honour of his wife, Queen Charlotte. On your left, the assembly rooms, late 18th, early 19th century. This was built as the entertainment centre for the first new town. There hadn't been one factored into James Craig's plans for the new town. So that building was, well, it was built with money raised entirely by public subscription. We used to be great at that sort of thing in Edinburgh. It was money by public subscription that paid for the magnificent Scott Monument in Princes Street. Now, when you're in Princes Street, you'll see the Scott Monument. It's 200 feet and 6 inches tall, 288 steps to the top. You can't miss it. To the memory of Walter Scott. Walter Scott, he lived quite close to here in the New Town, just off George Street in North Castle Street. As you turn to your right hand side here, normally we go all the way along the road to Charlotte Square, but we can't. You can see there's a fairground in the way, but at least they put up a sign that says road closed. We would never have guessed. Turning to our right hand side, and at the top of the hill on the right is the townhouse that Walter Scott used to live in. Walter Scott was a great writer. He was a writer, lawyer, judge, poet, inventor. He invented the genre of historical fiction. He invented the myth of the noble romantic Highlands. He invented the myth of the noble romantic Highlander. He also invented 200 years ago, in August 1822, for the state visit of George IV, modern Highland dress. Edinburgh drivers, they're always want to surprise you. My goodness. Scott was incredibly successful. He decided he wanted to build his dream home, Abbotsford, down in the Scottish borders. He spent a fortune on it. He was a great writer. He wasn't a great businessman. He went bankrupt for various reasons, with debts in today's money, £28 million, £128,838, 11 shillings and threepence. He paid the debt off. He refused to declare himself bankrupt. He said he would pay every penny back, and he did. It took him 7 years, and his death, and he sold the copyrights on his work, which finally settled the debt. Now, coming into Charlotte Square, and Charlotte Square, designed by Robert Adam in 1791. Adam then sadly died in 1792, never even saw ground broken, or his greatest achievement. Now, coming through the traffic lights here, at the next traffic lights, on the right-hand side, there's a blue door. In that building, Alexander Graham Bell was born. He didn't go to Canada till he was 23. His two brothers had died in Edinburgh of tuberculosis. That's his birthplace there on the right. So his parents, at the age of 23, moved with Alexander to Paris, Ontario, and he lived with relatives, and it changed his life. His mother was deaf, his wife was deaf, and he was working on a speech therapy machine to help the deaf to hear and to speak when he invented his version of the telephone.
Oh.
Alexander Graham Bell hated telephones so much he wouldn't have one in his house. And there used to be just a tribute here, down at the bottom of South Charlotte Street. On the left and the right at the bottom, there were two mobile phone shops. I can see there's one still there on the left, within a stone's throw of the birthplace of the man who started it all. The one on the right score is now Pret-a-Manger. Coming into Princes Street, and on your left-hand side, St John's Episcopal Church, which is a massive connection to Joan Baez, the American singer-songwriter. Her grandfather was an Anglican priest in that church, and her mother was also from Edinburgh. Turning to our left, to bus stop number 2, the Financial Centre and Lothian Road. If anyone would like this bus stop, ring the bell or stamp your feet. No one for here, Faye. Thank you very much. Now, there are people joining the bus, so I'll just be quiet for a second while we speak to Faye. Hello. Hello. On your left-hand side there is St Cuthbert's churchyard. Now, there are quite a few well-known people buried in St Cuthbert's churchyard. Just picking 3, we got Thomas de Quincey, the man who wrote the English Opium Eater, John Napier, who invented logarithms, which they tried valiantly to teach me, but never went through my head. And also in that churchyard on the left is buried Charles Darwin. Not that Charles Darwin, his uncle, who came to Edinburgh as a student Brilliant medical student, they said he was, and he died at the age of 19, tragically young. Charles Darwin, the famous one, he came to Edinburgh as well to study medicine, until he discovered that the sight of blood made him faint, and he changed his course. And in later life, he changed the course of history. On your right-hand side, the Caledonian Hotel, 5-star railway hotel until 1964. It had a railway station underneath it. And past the Caledonian, on the right-hand side, that's the brand new financial centre for not just Edinburgh, but for the entire country of Scotland. Lothian Road, where we are, is a mile long, stretching from the west end of Edinburgh all the way up to Toll Cross, maybe just a bit more than a mile. And it's got pubs, restaurants. There's a restaurant to suit every pocket and every taste. It's also got theatres and cinemas. And on your left, the best concert hall in Scotland, the Usher Hall, gifted to the city by Andrew Usher, a distiller, in 1914. The acoustics in there are so good that even if the concert is terrible, at least you can hear it's terrible extremely clearly. And on either side of the Usher Hall, there are two theatres. On the right-hand side of the Usher Hall is the Royal Lyceum Theatre from the 1880s. Magnificent, mid-size, Frank Matcham inspired proscenium arch theatre. And on the other side, the Travers Theatre, 20th century. On your right, Film House. Well, Film House, you can see there are metal shutters on the doors and windows, which is a tragedy. Film House and the accompanying Edinburgh International Film Festival, the charity that owns them went bankrupt about 2 months ago. So we lost a 3-screen art house independent cinema, also showing mainstream films, and an excellent cafe bar, which was culturally important for the city of Edinburgh. But losing the International Film Festival, which is 75 years old this year, is culturally important to the entire continent of Europe. The film festival, Woody Allen insisted all his films were premiered at the International Film Festival. E.T. was premiered in that building down there. Pulp Fiction was premiered in that building down there. Turning to our left into Bread Street, the bakers lived and worked here for a very good reason. At the top of the hill there, at the traffic lights, that's called Main Point, and Main is an old Scottish word for flour, and the principal flour markets were up at the top of the hill there. So the bakers, naturally, congregated here. Turning to our left into Spittle Street, as we turn on the right-hand side, one of the loveliest little pubs in Edinburgh, the Blue Blazer. I don't think it's open at this time of the morning. Coming to bus stop number 3, which is Johnson Terrace and the Castle Rock. This isn't the stop for the castle, that's number 4. The Castle Rock is at least 350 million years old. It's basalt dolomite. It would have flowed all the way across the street and down into the southern valley, the valley of the Grassmarket on the right-hand side. The northern valley is the valley of Princes Street. They were caused by a glacier hitting the Castle Rock at this end about 20,000 years ago, split into and carved out the hills and valleys on which Edinburgh stands, of which there are many more than the 7 that it's claimed. Now, coming up Johnson Terrace, blasted through the Castle Rock in the 1830s. On the other side of the valley, there's a big red building with 3 massive windows lit. That is the back of the Art College, ECA. Sean Connery, Edinburgh-born actor, born about 3/4 of a mile from here. When Sean Connery was a young, starving, penniless actor, he would pose naked for life drawing classes in that building there on the right. When he became famous, he decided he wanted to buy the buildings back. But the art school, very wisely, decided they wanted to keep them. Up on your left-hand side, the Castle Esplanade. Now, there are great views from up there, and you don't have to pay to get onto the Esplanade. You pay to get into the castle. The Esplanade is always free. It's impossible to get views from it between May and September because it's surrounded by 8,800 temporary seats for the magnificent summer concerts that Leonard Cohen won. will always be remembered. The summer concerts in Edinburgh, and then in August, the Edinburgh military tattoo is up there on the left. And there's a great view down to the right from the Esplanade to George Heriot's School. And George Heriot's School is just down in this gap here on the right, with a clock tower and turrets. You see it down there. People will tell you that's the inspiration for Hogwarts in the Harry Potter books. If you speak to J.K. Rowling, who lives in Edinburgh, and who wrote the Harry Potter books, she'll tell you it isn't the inspiration for anything she ever wrote. On your left-hand side, the tall spire on St John's Highland Talbot Church. It's a lovely building designed by James Gillespie Graham and Augustus Pugin. No longer a church, now the centre for Edinburgh International Festival, which, like the film festival, celebrated its 75th birthday this year, 2022. On the left-hand side, going up the hill, is Castle Hill, and that leads directly up to Edinburgh Castle. And we're coming to bus stop number 4 for the castle. If you want to go to the castle, this is the best time of the day to go. And Faye will be pulling into bus stop number 4, and if you wish to leave the bus here, then you can. Thank you. Bus stop number 4 is just here to the left. Thank you. This is bus stop number 4, should anyone wish to leave. And it's the second highest part of the Royal Mile. The Royal Mile, looking right down the Royal Mile, you're looking down 1,000 years of history. But it's only been the Royal Mile since 1902. That was when a man called W. Gilbert first used the term in his book Edinburgh in the 19th century. Until the mid-19th century, this wasn't a long, wide street you could walk all the way down. It was 5 separate streets, and they were clearly defined and separated by city walls, by buildings. When they all came down, we were left with a Royal Mile stretching from the Royal Castle behind us to the Royal Palace at the bottom of the hill. Turning into George I Bridge, and on your right hand side there's a tip for you. If you ever plan to move to Edinburgh, invest in scaffolding. You cannot possibly go wrong. And the next building with the scaffolding on the right is the lovely Edinburgh Central Library, which was gifted to the city by Andrew Carnegie, the Scottish-born American steel billionaire. Ironically, behind all that cladding it says, "Let there be light," his motto. Now, if you look down to your left and your right here, you can see that we're 50 feet above the dark, gloomy canyon that is the Canongate, one of Edinburgh's oldest streets. Coming to Greyfriars, in the 15th century, 6 Franciscan friars from Holland came here and established Greyfriars Abbey. In the 16th century, during the Protestant Reformation in Scotland, it was destroyed, and in the 17th century, it was rebuilt as Greyfriars Parish Church. It's behind the pub on the right-hand side. In front of the pub was a statue of a little dog, just here. That's Greyfriars Bobby, a little Skye Terrier. His owner, John Gray, was a night watchman, a town constable. He died from consumption in 1858. Bobby followed the cortege into the churchyard and slept on his grave from 1858 to 1872. If you didn't get a decent look at him then, don't worry, we'll see him another twice. All the way around. And coming into the University of Edinburgh's main area, set back from the road, just be coming into view in just a second. We have the oldest purpose-built student union building in the world with the twin turrets and the red and green lights. That's a Tediate Row House, where over 40 years ago I met my wife. Coming to what was the beginning of Edinburgh's medical district, and on the left-hand side now is the old medical school. The medical school was moved from this building about 20 years ago when its next door neighbour, the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, moved to a new site. The infirmary building is directly ahead of us on the left. When it opened in the 1870s, it was the largest, best designed hospital in the world. To domestic Gothic. It used to be smoke blackened. It had massive impact. The university have acquired it and they've done quite dreadful things to it.
Gaganda ng mga
On your right hand
structure.
side, this is George Heriot's school. The school that J.K. Rowling insists isn't the inspiration for
Wow,
Hogwarts.
ang mga structure.
George Heriot, who gifted the school to this city, was a goldsmith to James VI and his wife Queen Anne of Denmark in the 17th century. They said he had so much money when he walked his pockets jingled. So they called him Jingling Geordie. And there's a great pub called Jingling Geordie's between Market Street and the High Street, just running parallel almost with Coburn Street. Now on the left hand side we have the Lorison building, outpatient departments, dental hospital, blood transfusion, headquarters, and going through the traffic lights, still on the left, a little hospital called the Chalmers Hospital. George Chalmers made a fortune from being a plumber, and in the 1860s he gifted the city a hospital with one stipulation, that one bed must always be kept open, empty and free, just in case a plumber ever needed hospital treatment. It's there on the left. It's now a clinic. It's the Chalmers Centre. It's a reproductive health clinic. So at least to some extent they're keeping up the plumbing motif. On your right hand side, with the arches, that's the old fire station. All the old fire stations in Edinburgh, pre-petrol engines, are at the tops of hills, because you had to push them. So, if you're at the top of a hill, you got a running start. Coming down to where Burke and Hare lived. William Burke and William Hare came to Edinburgh from Ireland in the 1820s to work on the
Ayun na po
Looming
yung castle
Canal.
doon sa
They then murdered
taas.
no fewer than 17, possibly as many as 30 people, and
Ayun
sold
po
their
yung
bodies to
castle
an anatomist,
sa taas.
Robert
Nadaanan
Knox.
po natin.
Arrested, he had testified against Burke. Nothing happened to Knox. Burke was hanged by the Lawnmarket in January
Ayan guys,
1829 in front of a
nasa
crowd
taas po
of
kami.
25,000
Kapunti po ang
people,
nag-join ng
maybe
group tour.
40,000. He
Gawa
was
po ng
publicly
napakaaga pa.
dissected.
Alas 9 pa
The
lang po ng
skin was
umaga.
removed. It was brought here to the left. Used to be
Alas
two
5 sa
tanneries
Montreal.
on the site of the
Kasi
60s
6
brutalist Michael
hours
Wade
po
designed
ahead
Argyle House.
ang
And
time
Burke's skin
difference.
was turned into leather. And from
So sa
there into
Pilipinas,
novelty
isa alas
goods.
5 rin po
And quite
ng
literally, bits and pieces of Burke turn up
hapon.
in private collections and museums throughout the city of Canongate.
So ang gaganda po ng mga
Coming
structure
down to the
dito.
Grassmarket, one of the nicest parts of this city, and it's bus stop number 6. There's some really great little restaurants,
So yung
cafes, and
sinasabi po
shops
niyang
and
bus
pubs,
stop, pwede po kami bumaba,
particularly from
pero
this area.
we decide po
Including
na
Moon's
magstay
Milk
dito
Bar,
at
which is
mamaya
on
na
the
lamang
right,
po
and
kami
I'm told it's the best
maglakad-lakad.
ice cream
Ayan,
in
guys.
Edinburgh. I
Oh,
haven't
ang
had it,
ganda.
but enough people
Oh,
have
yan
told
po yung
me
castle.
to convince me that it must be. On
Ayan.
the left-hand side, the beehive in that great pub. You go through the beehive, one of the best beer gardens in Scotland, at the back. Anyone for this stop?
Ayan. The white
No one for your faith, thank you.
made
Coming up the Grassmarket, there are, well, within a 10-minute walk of here, there are 4 sites of public execution. There's one up at the Lawnmarket, there's one at St Giles, there's the saddest one, halfway up Castle Hill, in memory of the
Ayan,
hundreds
guys,
of
oh.
people, mostly women, of course,
Hindi ko kasi
who were strangled
maiharap
or
yung,
burned or
yung
hanged
camera sa
over a
akin. Once
period
na
of
may
a couple
start
of
ko
hundred
na
years for
sa
the nonsensical
harap ko,
crime
hindi ko na
of
pwede
witchcraft. Those poor people
i-focus, ibalik sa akin.
executed
Kaya hindi po
because
ninyo ako
of
makikita mga
superstition.
guys. So keep
Now,
watching
coming
lang mga
up to
ka-people.
the end
Ito po ang inyong kaibigan Pilgrim sa
Greyfriars, at the
Montreal.
end of Grassmarket,
Iniikot po
and the
namin
fourth
kayo.
site of
Nag-avail
public
po kami
execution.
ng city
And it's
tours
just
para
here,
po makuhaan
on
ko
the
ng
left.
maganda
It's a
ang
stone
aking video
circle
at ng buo.
just at the
So
top here.
ayan guys.
On the left
Dahil
there.
po sa inyo,
Going up the hill
kahit
on
po
the left is
pumastos
Victoria
ang
Street.
ka
It's
ng
one of the
20
loveliest
pounds,
streets in
90
Edinburgh.
pounds,
Halfway up it is the Bull Bar.
masiyahan
One
lang
of the
po
loveliest pubs
tayong
in
lahat.
Edinburgh.
Hindi lang po
People
ako,
will tell you that
kayo na rin
Victoria
po
Street
na
is the
nanonood.
inspiration for
So
Diagon
just keep
Alley in the Harry
watching
Potter
mga
books.
ka-people,
Once
okay?
again, J.K. Rowling will tell you, no, it definitely isn't.
Dito po kami sa
Up on
Looming.
your right, we're going up Candlemaker Road. The candle makers were moved here at the beginning of the 18th century because of the risk of fire, also because of the smell. Candles were made from animal fat, so they smell pretty badly. On your right-hand side, behind that wall, that revetment holding the graveyard on is Greyfriars Church and Churchyard. Greyfriars Church opened in November 1620 on the same day the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth Rock. And to celebrate that fact, inside the church there's a large Stars and Stripes and an information board gifted by the American consulate in Edinburgh, one of the oldest in the world from the 1790s, explaining the link between Massachusetts and Greyfriars Churchyard. Now, coming up to the top of the hill and on the left, the back of the statue of Greyfriars Bobby. Greyfriars Bobby, lovely story. It's looking on his owner's grave from 1858 to 1872. About 7 years ago, somebody suggested if you rub Bobby's nose, it will bring you luck. I promise you it won't. And it hasn't been lucky for Bobby, it's destroying the statue. And they're talking about having to move it from here, so if you have to rub his nose, please do it very gently. We'd hate to lose it because of, once again, superstition. Coming to the Bedlam Theatre directly ahead of us, the new North Free Church. It was in 1846, built on the site of the Bedlam Mental Asylum, the Bethlehem Hospital. The university acquired the building, turned it into an all-student-run theatre called the Bedlam Theatre. On your right-hand side, the green ground floor building is Napier's the Herbalist, been there since 1860. Turning to our right-hand side, and back into the university. On your left, where it says Bristol Square and Teviot Place, that's the McEwen Hall, which is a lovely, lovely concert hall, usually only used for graduations now. It was gifted to the university by the McEwen Brewing family, and that's only fair given the amount of money Edinburgh students have gifted to McEwen's over the years. I said the medical school had gone from this building on the left, but not quite. They still teach anatomy in that building because there's a really excellent anatomical museum in there. So it's easier to bring the students back to the building for one course than it is to take the building to the students. In better times than these, pre-March 2020, on the final Saturday of every month, they opened the Anatomical Museum to the general public for free. Sadly, since first lockdown, they haven't been doing it. Coming into Forest Road, and on your left-hand side, Thomas J. Walls, the grey marble-fronted building, used to be just about the most high-class opticians in Edinburgh. Now it's where you get the best coffee in Edinburgh, there on the left. Sandy Bell's, the Forest Road Bar on the left. It looks like a scruffy corner pub. That's exactly what it is. But it's world famous. People come from all over the world to play and listen to folk and traditional music in that pub. Emmy Lou Harris has played in that pub. Going to turn to our right hand side into Chambers Street, and Chambers Street is bus stop number 7, and bus stop number 7 is the National Museum of Scotland, one of the world's great museums. Open every day, 10 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, and always free to get in to the National Museum. If anyone would like this bus stop, if you ring the bell or stamp your feet. No one for your feet, thank you.
Yan po. Ayan, National Museum of Scotland.
On the right hand side there, that's the
National
museum building. It was designed by an Irishman who came from the same part of Ireland as Burke and Hare. A man called Francis
National
Fowke.
Museum of Scotland.
Apart from being an architect, he was a captain in the Royal Engineers. The foundation stone for the building there was laid in 1861 by Prince Albert, September 1861, Queen Victoria's husband. He then died of typhus in December 1861, which doesn't seem possible. The museum is one of Francis Fowke's great works, but his better known work is the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Royal Albert Hall in London, and when he died, his drawings were used for parts of the Natural History Museum in South Kensington, which is one of Britain's best buildings. The entrance to the museum used to be up those steps and in those arched doors. They've moved it for accessibility.
Yan, open daw po yan.
But as a child walking up those steps, the anticipation of going to the
Maga pa
museum.
po dito, mga
Just
9 na.
Coming down
Start po ang
Chambers
aming
Street, most
tour.
of it is owned by the University
City
of
tour
Edinburgh
ng
now.
9 o'clock.
And at the bottom on the right, that large building we're coming to
Malamig po
now
ang
is
weather
Old
dito.
College, the
Malamig
law
po. Iba pong
faculty of
klaseng
Edinburgh
lamig.
University. The university
I
was
pray po
was the
no,
fifth oldest
we
university
are
in
on the
Scotland.
way to
But
Scotland.
it is crucially
Kasi
the
nakita
first
namin sa
secular
weather na
university.
maulan
The
po.
first
I
established
pray na
after
sana
the
naman
Reformation.
pagbigyan kami ng
So with no
magandang panahon
permissions from the
dahil
Vatican, that's very,
hindi
very
naman po
important
kami taga
for the
dito
history
kaya
of independent
sana sabi
education
ko
in
wag
Scotland.
naman po
It's
sana
the oldest
umulan.
civic foundation in the
And
English-speaking
hindi po
world,
tayo
newly
napagnon,
established
hindi
by
po
the people of
umulan.
Edinburgh,
At
with a
pero
royal
it's
charter
getting
from King
cloudy,
James VI
pero
in
I hope na
1582,
cloudy
opened its
lang,
doors to
no
its
rain.
first students in 1583.
Kasi pagka
The university, it's
umulan, mababasa
law.
tayo dito sa
That's
taas.
the law faculty there, you can see it's
Kaya
and
po,
that's of course, and it's built on the site of the
no
original
choice,
university
bababa kami
buildings.
pag
Edinburgh,
umulan.
however, will always
Pero
be
habang
associated
hindi pa po
more with
umuulan,
medicine. Since
sinasamantala ng
1505,
Pilikan
predating
na
the
makuhaan
university,
ko
when
ang
James
tour
IV
dito po
established
sa
the Royal
Scotland,
College of
sa
Surgeons
capital
of
po
Edinburgh,
ng
the second oldest
Edinburgh.
in the world, behind Dublin. But if you want to go to Surgeons Hall, the headquarters of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, it's up on your right-hand side, about 50-60
Nahilo
yards.
po kasi kaya
Magnificent 19th century
stoplight.
William Henry Playfair building with 3 medical museums inside it. And against the trend in Edinburgh, you have to pay to get into the medical museums at Surgeons Hall.
Ay doon. Tayo ng
Turning into South Bridge, one of the 6 great bridges built between 1763 and 1833 to expedite, facilitate the massive expansion of the city. And once again, if you look down to your left and to your right, you'll see that once again it's the dark, gloomy canyon that is the Canongate. Coming up on the left-hand side, there's a tall spire on the Tron Church. Tron Church is a
big
17th
size
century
slice,
church,
2
but now
pounds.
it is the interpretive centre for Edinburgh's famous UNESCO World
Ang lamig.
Heritage Sites, of which there
Kaya
are
lamig
3,
po yung kamay.
the Old Town, the New
Kamay
Town,
ko.
and down at Queensferry, that magnificent piece
The
of late
Scotland shop.
19th century Scottish civil engineering that is the Forth Bridge. We're going to rejoin the Royal Mile. We left it at the Grassmarket, and we'll be rejoining it at the second part of the High Street,
Hilton.
right in the middle of the Royal Mile here. If anyone would like the High Street, John Knox House, it's just down the hill here on the left.
Radisson
Ring the bell
Hotel.
or stamp your feet. Anyone for here? No one for here, Faith, thank you.
Walang gustong bumaba.
John Knox House is sticking out onto the pavement there. John Knox was a 16th century Scottish Protestant
of
religious
Scotland.
reformer. We call it John Knox House. He never lived
The
there.
Nutcracker.
He couldn't possibly have lived there because when he was in Edinburgh, it was owned by the Mossman family, who were prominent Roman Catholics and jewellers to Mary Queen of Scots. So diametrically opposed to everything that John Knox stood for. The stone structure on the left-hand side is a wellhead. Now, before we had
Masaya.
piped water into the buildings in Edinburgh, and we're talking about as late as the early 20th century. Before we
Guys,
had
nakikita
piped
nyo,
water into buildings
wala
in
pang
Edinburgh,
masyado
you had to
nag-join
queue
ng group
at
tour
the wellheads.
dahil maaga pa lang po,
There were very
9
few
o'clock.
placed throughout the Old Town. The Old Town, for a couple of hundred years, was the most overcrowded and worst slum in Europe. Edinburgh Old Town was built on what's called the Crag and Tail Formation. The crag, the Castle Rock, the tail, what was left when the glacier went round it about 20,000 years ago, and left what we now call the Royal Mile. So they built all the way down here, and down the slopes on either side of the tail. To make matters worse, they put city walls all the way around the Old Town, so you couldn't expand to the sides, you couldn't expand to the front, to the back, you had to go up. In the late 17th century, some of the buildings in the Old Town were 14 stories tall. As late as the 1860s, when we had a commission to look into just how bad Edinburgh was, it was found it wasn't uncommon for 4 families to share one room in a tenement building. Not one apartment, one room, separated by 6-foot-tall wood and plaster partitions. If you wanted a fire, you brought in a flat stone, put it on your part of the floor, and lit a fire on the stone. So, this part of the high street was the worst address in the worst slum. Todrick's Wynd, which is just up behind us on the right hand side, was the very, very worst place. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people lived here, and they all needed water for washing, for drinking, for cooking, and they all had to queue at the wellheads. It was bedlam. Many people just didn't bother. The dram shops, as they were called, the whiskey shops, they made huge amounts of money because people would drink whiskey or cheap gin or cheap beer
Malamig po ang weather
instead of
dito.
water. And who
Kaya
could blame them?
naka-winter jacket
Coming
po.
down to the Netherwell
Mas
Port
malamig po
Junction,
ang
the
weather
lower
dito sa
gate to the
Scotland
city,
kaysa sa London.
the Royals End, as it's called. This is where Edinburgh ended until 1856. Edinburgh was established by King David I, really, in the 12th century. In 1128, he established Holyrood Abbey down at the bottom of the hill here. There was nothing between here and Holyrood down at the bottom. 20 years later, it became what was known as a regality, which was a territorial jurisdiction given by the king to important people, the important people here being the monks at the bottom of the hill. So a regality, it was a town, and it was a town within Edinburgh.
Ang gaganda po
Think
ng
of
mga
Canongate
structure
now,
dito.
as one street. But Canongate at that time stretched all the way to North Leith, where it had its own port, to Cannon Mills, to the north of the city, where the monks from Holyrood had their flour mills. And the city walls were right across here. You rang a bell, you paid a fee to get between Edinburgh and Canongate. Coming down to bus stop number 9 for Canongate Church and Canongate Tollbooth, you need 3 things to be a town: a church, a tollbooth, and a market cross. We'll see them all in just a minute. If anyone would like this stop, if you ring the bell or stamp your feet. On your right hand side there are 2 stone needles sticking up at the pedestrian crossing. That's the entrance to Murray House. Murray House was where the Act of Union was signed between Scotland and England in June 1707. But since 1958 it's been Edinburgh's teacher training college, just here on the right hand side. J.K. Rowling studied there to be a teacher, and she doesn't deny it. On your left hand side, the Canongate Tollbooth, the Town Hall, 16th century building, just coming up with a ridiculous Victorian clock here on the left hand side.
Princess
Canongate
Orange.
Tollbooth. Beside it, Canongate Church. We call it the Queen's Church because Queen Elizabeth II used to attend this church when she was in Edinburgh. Just there with a lovely statue of the great Robert Ferguson, the poet, outside it. And the third element, on your left, the Market Cross. That meant you were a serious place. Market Cross, a town hall, and a parish church. The original parish church was down at the bottom of the hill here at Holyrood.
Ang kamay ko
And
nanginginig
we're coming
sa
to
lamig.
bus stop number 10 for Holyrood Palace, Holyrood Abbey, and the Scottish Parliament building. If anyone would like this bus stop, ring the bell or stamp your feet. No one for your fee, thank you. Looking down through the gates there, you can see there's a grey square stone tower at the back. That's 12th century and it's part of the Abbey. In front of it, on the right, the brown building with the grey turrets is the Northwest Tower, the oldest still standing part of the palace built by King James V, made the Queen of Scots' father in the 16th century. On your right, the Scottish Parliament building, designed by a Spanish architect, Enrique Morales, who sadly, in the tradition of Edinburgh architects, died before his building could be finished. His wife Benedetta, she finished it for him. Now, as we turn here, if you look to your right, you'll see on the Parliament building there are lots of black shapes on the windows. What could those be? Well, the black shapes, they're not hair dryers. They're not the evident Robert Walker skating on Duddingston Loch from the painting by Henry Raeburn. I'll tell you what they are when we come back from the the park, and I hope everyone upstairs can hear the tour okay.
Ayan po, parang parliament.
Coming into the park, the escarpment ahead of us, the Salisbury Crags. James Hutton, the father of geology, did much of his work up there in the 18th century on his book The Theory of the Earth, which took the opinion that the Earth was 6,000 years old and replaced it with the knowledge that it was hundreds of millions of years older than that.
Castle.
So to celebrate that fact, as a homage to Hutton, a homage to the Crags, a homage to the planet, in 1999 the Queen opened down here Dynamic Earth. It quickly established itself as one of the great attractions in Britain. Dynamic Earth was the idea of two scientists at Edinburgh University, Sandy Crosby and Gordon Craig, a geographer and a geologist. And if Edinburgh is about anything, it's about history, geography and geology. And that building down through the trees on the right with the cables and poles on the top is the history of the planet in one building, Dynamic Earth. Designed by the great architect Sir Michael Hopkins. It looks a small building. It goes down many stories underground,
Malamig po
and
dito,
it
guys.
is
Kahit hindi nag-snow. Grabe.
just a great attraction, and it really is worth
Naninigas
going
na
in
yung
for
kamay
a
ko.
look.
Wala po kasi ako.
If you want to go to Dynamic Earth, it's always best check it on the website if it's
I don't
open,
wanna
first of
go
all.
out. Malapit.
And
Kaya yung mga
Faye
tao po,
can sell you a
naka-winter
ticket for
jacket.
Dynamic Earth cheaper than Dynamic Earth can sell them to you. Faye is going to turn the bus there. So Dynamic Earth on the right, opened by the Queen in 1999.
So,
Barclay
papasok po
House
tayo.
on the left, opened by the Queen in 1999 as the home of the Scotsman newspaper, Scotland's quality morning paper. It's now the home of a company called Rockstar North, whose main
Yeah,
product
printing
is a
press.
computer game, Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto 5, in its first 24 hours, brought in income of more than £575 million. So they're doing okay. Coming into Dynamic Earth, the front of the building, oh, it's interesting, the front of the building. The whole building's interesting, but the front.
Yeah.
As we come in, you'll see there's a grass mound. On the other side of the grass mound, there's a stage.
Ayan. Welcome
And
to
leading up to the
Dynamic
building,
Earth.
the steps are laid out in a fan shape. That's because there are also seats, and the whole of the front of the building doubles as a magnificent amphitheatre. The acoustics has been really cleverly done. The acoustics
Yes,
are
circle
wonderful.
po.
You hardly need
Ayan,
amplification. The
ikot-ikot
plan
po
was to
tayo
have
doon.
summer concerts here in the
Welcome.
evenings. They've never really happened
Discover
because
the
the locals with the
explore the
expensive
deep
flats,
sea through
well, they
dynamic.
didn't want the noise, which I think is a
Ayan.
great shame and a great opportunity missed. And congratulations to Sir
Explore the
Michael
deep
Hopkins
sea.
for coming up with
There's
this
a brand new
magnificent idea.
Dynamic Earth. Discover the deep-
Anyone for here?
No one.
No one for here, Faith, thank you. Turning towards the Scottish Parliament building on the right and the
Yes,
left,
Parliament building
and
po.
in the middle, the 17th century Queensberry House, the cream building with a red roof and the Dutch gables. The Marquess of Queensberry, he came back there in June 1707 after signing the Act of Union between Scotland and England, and discovered that his 10-year-old son, James Earl of Drumlanrig, who was always kept locked
Ayan
up,
po. Ayan
described
po
at the
yung
time as an
natin.
imbecile
Ayan.
and dangerously insane. He'd escaped, he'd knocked over a kitchen boy, was roasting him on a spit and eating him. Taken away from Edinburgh, he died 8 years later in either Yorkshire or Lincolnshire in
Yeah,
England, we don't know
Edinburgh.
which. But from that moment
Edinburgh.
he became known as the cannibalistic idiot. Seems fair enough, really. Coming into the Royal Hunting Grounds, the park. King David I was down here hunting in the 12th century, the 1120s, when a giant white
Grabe,
stag
guys, ang
frightened
lamig
his horse.
po.
He fell off the horse, the
Hindi na ako
stag was about to
makita.
gore him to death.
Pero
When his
malamig po.
antlers, David looked up
Pero
and saw a gold
nagsigurado
cross
po ang
between
inyong
the antlers.
kaibigan. Nagsuot po ako
He
ng
reached up
winter
to touch the
jacket ko
cross.
na galing sa
The stag
Montreal.
magically disappeared.
Dahil
When did things like that
alam
stop
po
happening?
namin, in-search po
That
namin
night,
bago
in a
kami
dream,
pumunta dito
Scotland's
sa
Saint St
Scotland
Andrew
na
came to him and told
malamig.
him to show his gratitude. On the spot where the incident happened, he should erect a religious building. So in 1128, he opened Holyrood Abbey, first occupied by the Canons Regular, an Augustinian brotherhood of monks from Merton Priory in the Collier's Wood area of London. Beside the abbey, he built a small guest house.
Diyan po
And
tayo
over the
galing.
centuries, the guest house grew and developed until it became the Palace of Holyrood House. The great irony, of course, is that the palace flourished and the abbey is now a ruin.
At
Coming to the gates, on the right-hand pillar, a unicorn for Scotland. On the left, a lion for England. The Union of the Crowns in 1603. I'm looking into the palace on the right-hand side. That's the official residence of the monarch in Scotland. And at the moment, of course, after the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, it is King Charles III. The black shapes on the windows of the Parliament building are drawn back curtains to show you that Scotland has open government. And apparently an adult came up with that idea. On your right hand side, the low building, that's the old stable block. It's now the cafe. You don't have to pay to get into the cafe at Holyrood. But if you show your bus ticket with your hot drink, you get a free piece of shortbread in the shape of a crown. My goodness, I wish I had a ticket. Coming out of Holyrood, we'll turn to our right hand side and it will take us to our next bus stop, which is 100 yards from here. Just past a little 16th century building known as Queen Mary's Bathhouse. If anyone would like this bus stop, if you ring the bell or stamp your feet, and Faye will stop. Anyone for here? No one for here, Faye, thank you. On your right hand side, the little brown building with a slate roof is Queen Mary's Bathhouse, 16th century. The legend is many Queen of Scots would walk to this building one day every year for a bath, whether she needed one or not. Just a legend, of course. She did live at the palace from 1561 to 1567, taking time out in 1566 to live at the castle with a better security for the birth of her son James, who went on to become James
Guys,
VI of
naninigas na po ang kamay
Scotland,
ko,
James
sa
I
totoo lang.
of Britain and Ireland.
Pero
Coming up,
sakripisyo
Adelaide,
para lang may
which is
maibahagi
ahead.
po ako sa viewers ko.
And let's hope we will know what this is
Sana.
today. On your right hand side, that's Bray House. Bray is a Scottish word for a hill. Bray House is beautiful student accommodation. I was a student in
Bray
Edinburgh in the
House.
1970s. Bray House wasn't
Yan.
there. On its site was the
Grabe.
magnificent Astoria
God.
concert hall and dance
Nahihila ko
hall
po ang
and a really
pasensya
odd
na.
little pub called the Cat's
Bray
Pajamas.
House.
And I live and hope that someday we'll get on one of my buses and
Ang aming
remember not
kamay ay
only the
naninigas
Astoria,
na mga
but also the
kapipol.
1970s, the decade that fashion for
Buti na lamang makapal ang bonnet ko.
Turning to our left-hand side into Regent Road, and up on your
Abang.
right-hand side here, we've got Regent Terrace, some of the most expensive houses in
expensive
Scotland,
house.
and that's the view they have on the left when they
Expensive
open their
house.
curtains in the morning.
Pinakamahal
The
ng
park,
mga bahay dito sa
The palace,
Scotland.
the abbey, Arthur's Seat, the Salisbury Crags,
Yan po.
Dynamic
Yan.
Earth, the Parliament
Ito,
Building,
mahal
the
na
Old
bahay.
Town, and way in the distance, the Pentland Hills, which just a couple of days ago were completely shrouded in snow, all gone now. And we're coming to our next bus stop, and the next bus stop is for these views. It's also for the Burns Monument, it's for St Andrew's House,
St.
it's for the
Andrew's
Royal
House.
High School building, and for Calton Hill, which is behind the Royal High School building. It's a 15-minute walk up a well-made path to some of the best views in the southeast Scotland, in Scotland actually.
So, this is Scotland.
If anyone would like this bus stop, if you ring the bell or stamp your feet.
Ayaw namin bumaba.
No one for your feet, thank you. The
Kasi
Burns Monument
malamig.
is coming up on the left. It's by Thomas Hamilton. Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet,
1 hour
lived from
city tour
1759
po
to
tayo.
1796.
Naka 48 minutes na
you
po
see his
tayo.
monument is it's built in the Greek revival style. Edinburgh became known as the Athens of the North because of the first of
View
all
po
the
ng
Enlightenment
parliament.
in the 18th century and the philosophy, and because of the buildings. It didn't become known as the Athens of the North because the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, was born on a billiard table in Corfu, although he certainly was. And that is the Burns Monument on the left, and on your right, the Royal
The
High
Robert
School.
Burns.
The high school was founded in either the 11th or the 12th century. It was in that building from 1829 to 1968,
1829.
since when it's
This
been lying
building.
empty.
Oh,
We just
that's
heard it's
empty.
about to become the permanent home for Edinburgh's famous St
Looming.
Mary's Cathedral Music School, which is a fantastic outcome for everyone except the 5-star hotels who wanted it. So, a fantastic
Ayan guys
outcome.
na. overlooking po. Nasa
Up
overlooking.
on your
tayo.
right hand side
Wow.
is the Nelson Monument Uptown
Nelson
Telescope
na
for
naman. Ayan, guys.
Admiral Nelson and his
Nakikita
victory
niyo
at the
na po
Battle of
ang
Trafalgar in
view
1805.
ng
A pathetic
Scotland.
victory for him.
Oh,
He
wow.
died at the battle, and that's at the top of Calton Hill. On the left hand side, St Andrew's House, opened the day before war broke out in
St.
September
Andrew's
1939, designed by
Look at
Thomas
this,
S.
nice story,
Tate,
oh.
one of the last Art Deco buildings,
Kaso,
and its offices for the Scottish Government, and it's magnificent inside and out.
Nasa Torre.
And it leads down to the old Calton burial ground, which is on either side of the road. But most of it, the part we're interested in, is on the left-hand side. The old Calton burial ground has the grave of the great atheist philosopher from the 18th and 19th century, David Hume. It has the Martyrs Monument for the trade union martyrs who were deported, can't think of the word, to Australia. But also, behind that wall there on the left-hand side, there's the only American Civil War memorial outside the United States, and the oldest statue of Abraham Lincoln outside the United States, just up there on the left. Also, the graves of 6 men from Edinburgh who fought and died on the Union side in the American Civil War, and there are more American Civil War graves in Edinburgh. Just Google it.
Edinburgh.
What did we do before Google? Now coming into Regent's Bridge, another bridge which doesn't look like a bridge, to Princes Street. Princes Street, we're at the east end of Princes Street, and on your left-hand side, the Balmoral Hotel, opened in 1902 as the North British Railway Hotel, sitting above the North British Railway Station. It's always been a 5-star hotel. So if you look at the clock in the clock tower, why would a 5-star hotel have its clock at the wrong time? Well, that was because they wanted people to catch their trains, so they set the clock 3 minutes fast to make them think they were going to be late. Because the North British Railway Hotel sat above the North British Railway Station, Waverley Station, on your left-hand side. The second largest railway station in the UK, behind London Waterloo, on the south bank of the Thames in London. The Scott Monument, directly ahead of us, 200 feet and 6 inches tall, 288 steps to the top. Erected to the memory of Sir Walter Scott, writer, lawyer, judge, poet, inventor, invented the genre of historical fiction, invented the myth of the noble romantic Highlands, the myth of the noble romantic Highlander. He invented modern Highland dress, and he gave Scotland its tourist industry. Scots books were a phenomenon throughout the world and turned Scotland from just a North European backwater into a destination. People had come in the 18th century during the Enlightenment, but not many. Scots books read throughout the world, and people, particularly from places like Germany and North America, they came to Edinburgh and they came to Scotland to see this country that Scott had created in his head, which didn't actually exist. And the same thing's happening now with Diana Gabaldon and her Outlander books and Outlander television series.
Guys, kataas-taas, so.
But we're very grateful to Scott, and we're very grateful to Diana Gabaldon for giving us a tourist industry and sustaining it. Coming up and into St Andrew Square, which will be our last bus stop,
so
but
1
not
hour
yet.
city tour nga po talaga ito.
St Andrew Square,
1 hour city
a couple of
tour.
hundred years, the financial centre for the city and for Scotland. And it really was just about the dullest place in Scotland when it was a financial centre. Everything closed 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, apart from the bus station.
Taas
And
po,
this old
grabe
bus
mga
station that used to
structure.
have
Ang mga building ups.
monstrosity of this
Po.
place.
Ayan guys, nandito kami sa roof.
But now,
Ayan. Ito po
well,
kami
it's a
galing.
great place to come
Ganito
at any
nag-start
time
ang
of the day.
tour.
St Andrew Square, the gardens there in the middle,
Yeah,
they're owned by the Royal Bank of Scotland. The Royal Bank of Scotland still own most of the square and lease the buildings.
Dito na po
They were
nag-stop
still
yung...
private, those
Dito po tayo
gardens,
nag-stop.
when
O sumakay.
this was the financial
sa-
district. So vibrant, an excellent place to come now. There's some really
Dito
good
po
restaurants.
mag-e-end yung
And there are
sightseeing
shops that
tours.
if you're really bored,
Ayan na po
go
ang
to Harvey Nichols.
nakaparada
Just check
na
the
po
price
sa dulo
tags.
yung mga
Everybody
tour
deserves a laugh.
tour bus. Ayan.
We're coming down to Queen Street.
Iikot po niya tayo.
On the other side of
Bababa niya na po
Queen
tayo
Street
dun sa
Gardens
dulo.
is Harriet Row, and the second New Town. The second New Town was begun in 1820. We talk about Edinburgh New Town, we should really talk about Edinburgh New Towns, because over a period of about 100 years, from 1767, we built 6 new towns, plus their extensions. The little western extension, the eastern extension, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth new
55
towns.
minutes na tayo, guys.
The gardens here in Queen Street on the right hand side, well, unlike the gardens in Princess Street, these gardens are still private.
All down.
You have to own property here, you pay about £300 a year for a key to get into these gardens,
Ayan, guys.
which, I understand, is a bargain. With £300 to have this on your doorstep.
Ayan po yung
Now the
mga
tunnels
kasama
going
ko
from
sa
some of
unahan.
these houses in Queen Street,
Lumayo po ako dito sa
underneath
likod para makaikot po
Queen Street
tayo.
and directly into the gardens. That was to allow the householders privately to walk under the road and into the gardens. It was also a more practical purpose. Your staff could take your linen, your clothes, whatever needed cleaned, under the road privately into the gardens where there were bleaching fields set up all the way around. And washerwomen who would scrape and scrub and clean and dry your linen in the gardens. Many of the tunnels became used, well, when there were some restaurants in this the street, became used as restaurant kitchens. And quite a lot of them are leased,
So, okay,
the tunnels
guys.
for
Sakto
storage,
lang po tayo
for companies. So there's lots
I hope
going on
nag-enjoy
underneath
kayo,
Queen Street
mga
as well as on
ka-people,
top.
sa
Queen
1
Street and
hour
Princess Street were built as mirror
sightseeing
images
dito po
250
sa
years ago.
Scotland, sa
And it just
Edinburgh.
shows the
I hope na
statement that
nag-enjoy
they
po
wanted
kayo.
to
So,
make
wag po kayong
with this first
magsasawang
new town.
manood
I was talking about the
na
old town
aking
and all being
haking
hemmed in
video
by being
dito
thousands
sa
of people in
Pilcan
one
sa
place
Montreal.
and no space.
Kaya po yung hindi pa
When
po
you built the new
nagsusubscribe,
town,
mag-subscribe na. At maraming pong salamat sa walang sawa ninyong pagtangkilik, sa walang sawa ninyong panonood.
Just because we can.
Pagpasensyahan nyo na po kung
It was
isa
a
magalaw.
revolution. Only 3 streets in the first new town. Prince Street, Queen Street,
We're
George
having a
Street
good
in the middle.
time here in
3 crossover
Scotland sa
streets, Hanover
Edinburgh.
Street, Frederick Street, Castle
At
Street.
ito po ang aking ika-7 days staying here in the
To
United
try to get
Kingdom.
people to leave the darkness, the
I
disease of
spent
the old
the
town and
Christmas
come and live
holiday
where there's
here
light
in
and air
Europe.
and space, and eventually it worked. Charlotte Square
It's
designed by Roland
expensive
Adams,
tour, but
1791,
it's
died in
worth it.
1792. Never even saw ground broken on his greatest achievement. Ahead of us, that church spire that you can see is St Cuthbert's Church. St
And
Cuthbert's
church.
is the oldest Christian religious site in Edinburgh. There's been a church there for about 1400 years. That one is 18th and 19th century. It's right at the end of Princess Street, just about right at the end of Princess Street. And if you go into that church, there's the most magnificent stained glass window by a man called Louis Comfort
Hindi pa po ako
Tiffany of the Tiffany
nakakumukuha
Glass
ng
and
mga
Jewelry Company of
picture.
New York.
Mamaya na po,
Absolutely
pagka
beautiful.
nag-ikot ulit
David
po
going
kami,
off to
pwede
face
po kami
Goliath,
bumaba.
and it's in the
So,
Art
ayan, guys.
Nouveau style. And once again,
Saktong 1
I hope
hour.
everyone upstairs can hear. There seems to be quite a lot of noise. I hope it's not disturbing anybody who's trying to hear the tour. Thank you. On your right hand side, that is the Charlotte Square Gardens. And the equestrian statue in the middle is Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, who died in December 1861. And turning to our right, and on the left is once again the birthplace
Malamig.
of Alexander Graham Bell. He
Ayan
stayed
po ang
in
aking mga kasama.
Edinburgh until he was
Ayan.
23.
Ayan Si ate,
moved by his
ako hindi
parents
niya
with his
nakikita kasi
parents
ako
to Paris,
mahawak
Ontario
ng stick.
for his health. And we're coming to the next bus stop. It's our bus stop for Charlotte Square. If anyone would like this bus stop, ring the bell or stamp your feet.
Ang nanigas yung kamay ko.
Kaya nga, yan.
Ang lamig.
Go right through here, Faye, thank you.
So, saan
Now,
tayo
the
bababa?
bus stop is just outside that church. Well, it would be outside that church. On the left-hand side, that's St George's Church. Well, it was a church from 1814 to 1964. It's now part of the Records Offices of Scotland, and it's called West Register House, and has the court records for Scotland since court records began. And it's the only building in Charlotte Square not
The
designed
National Record
by
of Scotland.
Robert Adam, and you can see it's completely different in style and in stone to the rest of the square.
Okay, pagka
Now coming to
1
the
hour
north
skiter lang po
side
tayo,
of the
okay?
square, there are two front
Thank you
doors
for
that I want to
watching.
point out. You can see the